Okay, are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I made from last week, and what I want to do, because when we get into Bible studies, we're going to kind of span out all over the place, but I really want to bring it back home to like what is the absolute main points, and so get down to really simple. What's the question that's being addressed, and what are they saying most simply, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about all this stuff last time, and I don't think we got into the times of the Gentiles, and that's something we're going to get into a little bit more when we start to study Daniel. So we'll probably go from Matthew to Daniel because Christ tells you to go to Daniel. But essentially they're in this times of the Gentiles, and that's the captivity, right? And so that's where the kingdom has been taken from them. I'm sorry, that's where the kingdom has kind of been, because the king is not on the throne, they don't have a kingdom right now, right? And so when they asked Jesus, when is your kingdom going to come? We talked about how it really is a spiritual kingdom that he's announcing, but there is going to be a material kingdom come in the future, right? So those are the two comings that we addressed.
Right.
So what I wanted to do is just break it down to just what are those main points, and this one should actually say Luke 17. Like, what are these main takeaway points from Luke 17? And just kind of agree on, what is being said, and then, if we get into speculation or whatever, always bring it back to what did he say. So if you guys take this forward to study with somebody else, you can do all your speculations and your back and forth about this and this, but make sure you're bringing people back down to agreement on like, what was the question that was asked, right? And then what was definitely said in this passage. So we're building a foundation from what Jesus said first, what Jesus said second, what Jesus pointed to third, what Paul said, and really going, if you were somebody who had this teaching, what are you going to come up with by the time you get to the book of Revelation? So you're not all over the map when you get to Revelation, right?
Right.
So basically, these were the main things I broke it down to, is that before the day of the Lord, where the Lord appears, there's going to be something like the days of the Son of Man involving miracles, but we're not supposed to believe them or follow them, okay? So if we go back to what we were talking about in Luke 17, this is going to be a main thing, because this is going to help you interpret Matthew 24 accurately, because there's some contention on how to interpret Matthew 24, but Luke 17 should pin it down for you, so that where there's a discrepancy, you can clarify which one is true, okay? So when you get into Luke 17, we know from this passage that he's going to say, he said, when it was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom should come, he answered and said, the kingdom the kingdom of heaven comes not without observation, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there. In other words, nobody's going to be pointing it out to you and saying, here it is, there it is. It's going to be something everyone can see, right? So it's already within you. And then he says, you're going to be looking for the days of the coming of the Son of Man, but you will not see it. And they shall say to you, see here or see there. So notice he's saying, if anyone's trying to explain to you that the kingdom of God is here, you already know they're trying to deceive you, right?
Uh-huh.
Because he's saying when he arrives, everyone will know it. Every eye will see him, right? There will be no mistaking. There will not need to be somebody explaining to you that Jesus Christ is here or that the kingdom has come, okay? So he's saying, and they shall say to you, see here and see there, go not after them or follow them, okay? So he says that, and then he says, as lightning lighteth in the part of the east and shines in the other part of the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So this is important, okay? He says that, and then we know that when he appears, that's when the Jews flee Jerusalem, and that's when they see the rapture, right? So I want to make that point to you, because we know they're going to be saying, see here or see there, before he appears, which means that's before the Jews flee Jerusalem and before the rapture, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that are going to misinterpret Matthew 24 because they don't start with Luke 17, and you have to remember that Jesus had already given this teaching, which means everybody he's talking to at Matthew 24 already heard him say this. They're going to be saying, here he is, there he is, don't believe him until you see it coming in the cloud. So that's why I entitled my book, the Revelation, every eye will see him, because that's the main point. And when you get to the book of Revelation, he's going to say that in like verse 7, lo, I come in the clouds and every eye will see me, right? Like, that's the main point of the book of Revelation too. So you want to keep the main thing, and then your ancillaries, there's a limitation to how far around that that people can maneuver with the text once you get your main points nailed down solid, okay? Michael, do you want to introduce your wife?
Sure, yes. It's my wife and kids. She heard the first Bible study, and she said, I got to get in on this.
Okay, so you got caught up on the homework.
Yeah.
Okay. You said it's Latia?
Lakia.
Lakia. Okay, it's nice to meet you. I'm Aaron.
You as well.
Yep.
What's
and then
up, Lakia?
you know Tyson already?
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Good seeing you.
You as well.
So Lakia, we're just refreshing on Luke 17, and this is something that I'm going to post, and we can share it if we want to. I just really started putting this together a little bit this weekend, so we can kind of have like a recap of where we are. Because what I would hope to do with this Bible study is build this to something that either you guys can go through. Let's say you guys just want to take the main points of it, rather than have people watch these whole video sessions where we're going back and forth. And probably as we're getting done, I'll have this where you guys can share it. And then if you guys ever want to do another Bible study and walk other people through this, you can just do it on your own. But these are basically like the main points. So we know that the point is there's going to be something like the days of the Son of Man where they're claiming he's here before he's here, right? So that's kind of hinting at the Antichrist. We don't really have an express teaching on the Antichrist really until we get to Paul's teaching, but Christ is going to point to that teaching. And it's in Daniel, and then Paul gets it out of Daniel, and then he teaches it to the church. So, but you kind of have it hinted at here, something like the Son of Man involving miracles, right? And then the Lord appears like lightning, and everyone will see it, okay? So it's like the world's getting taken in by this deception, but he's warning the church not to get taken in, and then the real Christ is going to come, right? And then, of course, on the day that the Lord appears, we covered that on that day, the Jews are commanded to flee, just like Lot fled Sodom. And they will see people taken that night. Those are those main 2 points. The Jews are fleeing from Judea, and then they're taken in that night. So this is what they know when they hear Matthew 24. That's why I want to nail that down, okay? So now we're going to start on Matthew 24. And does one of you want to start reading? Start at the top and just take us down to the end of verse 3.
I can take it.
Okay.
Matthew 24, verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye now all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?
Okay. So we're going to start out in the most basic sense. Where are they?
Well, they must be in Jerusalem because it said they departed from the temple.
Okay. So and then where did they go?
The Mount of Olives.
Okay. Now, did one of you say you went to Israel, Tyson? Did you say you went to Israel?
Yeah.
Did you get to go to the Mount of Olives?
No, actually. I went to I was in Old Jerusalem. I could have been over there, but I just probably didn't know where it was. But
Okay.
I went to
Oh, go ahead.
I went to what was the Garden of Gethsemane.
Gethsemane, yeah.
And went to the Dead Sea, Jericho, and just basically walked all over Jerusalem, but and just old city Jerusalem too. So
Okay.
but I didn't know where the Mount of Olives were.
Okay. You probably were there, but maybe it just wasn't like, were you on a tour or were you just walking around yourself?
Just walking around.
Okay. So whenever you see this main picture of the Dome of the Rock here,
Mm-hmm.
right here where you're standing is the Mount of Olives. So,
Okay, yeah, I was there then.
Yeah, and so did you see all the gravestones and stuff?
No. Oh, yeah. I did. I walked past it. I didn't know that was it though.
They're like a bunch of like stone boxes with like little stones on them.
Yeah, it's right outside the gate.
Right. So that place is important because the Jews actually believe that the resurrection is going to occur and it's going to start right there.
Okay.
So this was something before Christ. This is actually where Christ ascends from, and it's actually where he says he's going to return to. He says he's going to set his feet down on the Mount of Olives, and that's what causes everything to split, right?
Nice.
And there's this gate. I don't know. Can you guys see this picture okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see down in the corner, see there's this little double gate? It's hard to see, but see if I can get a better picture of it. Yeah, you can hardly see it. It's way over here in the corner, but there's these two arches. It's a gate right here. So that gate is actually the gate that the Messiah is supposed to come through when in really where Jesus comes through in his second coming, right? So it was like under, I think it was like Salahuddin, who's like the he's like the Middle Ages, like during the Crusades, he was the main like Arab, or he's actually a Kurd, but he was like the leader of the Muslim armies, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had them wall that up. It was either him or somebody later had them wall that up because that's where they believe the Messiah is supposed to come through. And I kind of think when Jesus splits them out and it says he's going to split it and the city's going to depart half towards the north, half towards the south, I literally think he's going to split it so that gate opens up. I think. But anyways, they would bury their dead there because that's where they think the resurrection is going to occur. So, I mean, it is going to occur there, but they don't have the resurrection, right? Because they don't know the rapture because they don't believe in Christ. So, I just want to point that out. So that's kind of physically where they were. So if you can imagine the temple is somewhere around here, they probably went out of this gate and were probably chilling over here just having a talk. Okay. So I just want to point that out because sometimes the actual physical location you are is painting a picture. Jesus is actually, this is where he touches down on the Mount of Olives, and it's also where he ascends from in Acts chapter 2. So it's where you are is usually important when you're telling the story, especially in Jesus' ministry. And then he said he just went out of the temple, right? And they're admiring it. Okay. So I want to take you guys real quick to the synoptic passages, just so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are all going to say the same thing in a lot of places. So you want to make sure you're at least checking them for any additional details. Mark, I think it's Mark 13, says, as he went out of the temple, one of the disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings they are. So now you see them praising him, right? And Jesus answering him says, seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the table, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately. So see how you get a little bit more context there? So the reason is because if you understand the history of like when these gospels are written, Matthew was the first one. And when you hear about the apostles like all getting together and they're studying and they don't have time to serve tables because they're too busy like forming doctrine, they're actually writing the book of Matthew. And so the book of Matthew is basically Matthew's their scribe. He's the one who's writing it because he's probably the most educated of them because he's like a public official, right? And they're all putting their heads together to remember and write down what Jesus taught. Okay, so Matthew is their starting point, right? But when you get to Mark and Luke, Mark actually is recording from memory after Peter died. So Peter probably went to Rome and he basically gives his personal testimony of what Jesus did and what he saw, right? And so that's why you're going to have Mark as your critical scholars are going to say Mark was written first, and then they wrote Matthew afterwards to try to embellish Mark a little bit. But the fact is, Matthew was written first, and then Peter is telling the story, and it's going to be very similar in order to Matthew because he was with the guys who wrote Matthew. But it's going to have some details that might not be in Matthew because this is Peter's own account, right? Versus where Matthew's all of them putting their heads together and deciding what to write. Peter is saying what he saw. So, and for the most part, he starts with John the Baptist's ministry because they go and introduce Peter to Jesus like right after that, right? You'll read that in the book of John. So Luke is actually, remember how Paul's always talking about how he got the gospel in the spirit from the Lord and he didn't get it from the other apostles? So if you remember, Luke's following around Peter his whole ministry. And then Paul, he's following around Paul. And then Paul gets locked up in Caesarea for 2 years and then he gets shipped off to Rome. So this is what I'm assuming is that while Paul was in prison in Caesarea, which is in Israel, Luke was going around picking up all these testimonies to basically fact check Paul's gospel and write it down. And then when Paul gets to Rome, that's like his testimony that he's in court with. And so like, that's why Luke's got that in the book of Acts. And then after Paul dies, that gets published. So, but it's really Luke who's collecting all the details because it's Luke, Luke's his doctor. And then this other guy, Demas, is his lawyer. And then his lawyer abandons him. So Luke's writing down the story because it's like Luke's going to represent him because his lawyer's on. Does that make sense?
Right.
So you're going to have slightly different details because of who they're getting the story from. But this is basically Peter's account. Luke is Paul's account, plus Luke's probably going and getting other eyewitnesses. And then Matthew is all the apostles' account. So anyways, he says the same thing over here. So I just wanted to show you that. And then we get to Luke chapter 1. It says that as some spoke in the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones. He said, as for these things which you behold, the days will come when there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they asked him, saying, Master, when shall these things be? So here they don't mention that they went over to the Mount of Olives, but you got to remember, this is Paul's testimony, and Paul wasn't there. He's getting this from the Holy Spirit. So he's not necessarily going to include the details. He's more focused on what was said, okay? So I just want to point that out, and you guys will probably go back and forth there a little bit on things I remember, but I won't go into every last detail. But for the most part, we'll hang out in Matthew 24. But so you know where they are, and you know the context is him telling them the temple's going to be thrown down, right? Similar to like in Luke, he's out there and they're asking him when the kingdom's going to come, right? So when he asked him when the kingdom came in, just as simply as you can put it, when he asked when the kingdom would come, what did Jesus say?
Talking about Luke 17.
Yeah. And just summarize it. We don't need to get into exact details.
Like the kingdom comes without observation.
Right.
So it's already come spiritually, right?
Right.
And then, but later there's another fulfillment of that, right?
Yeah, the physical manifestation.
Right, when he appears in the clouds, right? He's bringing the kingdom again, right?
Right.
So in this one, he's going to do basically the same thing, right? So this is where people are going to get into a controversy, because some people are going to say, well, all these things were fulfilled in 70 AD, right?
Right.
But Jesus didn't come back in 70 AD, right?
Right.
But we already know how Jesus communicates, because he's telling you something that's already here spiritually. It's already fulfilled in one sense, but it's going to be fulfilled later in a greater sense, in a more complete sense, right? So I call that already not yet. Somebody else coined that term. It just makes sense to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually pretty common of prophets. It was like they would give a prophecy, and part of that prophecy, like to a pretty good degree, is going to get fulfilled in their lifetime or in their generation right after them. And that's how you would know to keep that prophet's prophecy, because there's other things that happen another time. So it's almost like most of their prophecies had like an immediate and then a later more full fulfillment, okay? So Jesus is no different. He's coming in his first coming as a prophet. And it's expected that he's going to give those kind of witnesses and those kind of evidences so that they keep his words as well, okay? So he is describing the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which is going to happen about 35 years from now. But he's also going to be talking about his second coming, okay? So I wanted to show you this because if we remember the questions carefully, it's pretty clear that he is. So for one is, what did they ask him in verse 3? What's the first thing they asked him?
They said, tell us when shall these things be?
Okay. So what are they responding to? When shall, just like in the other ones, remember, where shall they take them? Right?
Right.
We know they're not talking about the wicked. We're talking about those people who are taken, those are left, right? So we know they're talking about that. So he's saying, when shall these things be? What are these things that he's talking about?
The temple being destroyed, not one stone upon another.
Right. So that's very specific, right?
Right.
Okay. But then he asks something else too, doesn't he?
Yep.
What's the next thing he asks?
And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?
Okay, so there's two questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is, when will the temple be thrown down? And two is, when will be the sign of your coming and the end of the world, right?
Right.
Now, Jesus is already telling them that he's going to die, right? And rise from the dead, right?
Right.
Is he telling them that he's going to go away for 2,000 years?
No.
No. Do they have any way of, think about what you know from the Gospels. Do they have any way of knowing that yet?
No.
Okay. So when Jesus rises from the dead in Acts 2, you remember what the first thing they ask him is?
Have you come to like restore your kingdom?
Exactly, right? Like they think, like when he says, I'm going to return, they think he means return from the dead, right? So he's back. So now you're going to restore the kingdom, right?
Right.
So this whole idea of a pause for them to go bring in all the Gentiles is something that Jesus deliberately kept a secret in his ministry. And I talk about this in my videos all the time, but do you remember why Jesus keeps it a secret? It's in Corinthians.
It's a mystery.
Right. But why? Why did God keep it a mystery? For if the rulers of this world...
Oh yeah, they would never crucify Christ.
Right. So
Mm.
just like sinners are free, human beings are free will creatures, and people who don't trust God, God can still use them for his ends, but they're free will creatures, right? Well, the angels are free willed creatures too. And he's telling us flat out that the angels wouldn't have done it if they knew what they were doing, right? Like because it's basically Satan who orchestrated the death of Christ, right? So that's important theology right there, because people think angels are robots or something, like, but
Right.
but God is there's an actual reason for this mystery. God's not just being mysterious to be mysterious. He's working out his plans despite angelic powers trying to stop him, right? And so he's prophesying things, and he almost always seems like he's between a rock and a hard place, but he's God, so he's got this, right? So
Right.
so he's like saying, he puts himself in these positions where he's like, God will not reveal anything unless he won't do anything unless he reveals it to his servants, the prophets, right?
Right.
So we know if God does anything on the earth, we can go back and find a prophecy where he said he was going to do that, right? He doesn't just surprise us, right?
Right.
So he does that, and yet at the same time, he's keeping things that he's doing hidden from Satan, right? Well, if he's saying it through a prophet, Satan hears that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so what he does is he gives things in mysterious language or parables or, prophecies that are like, I don't even know what that means, and then all of a sudden the Holy Spirit comes in, and it could be through something another prophet says or another teaching. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what that thing meant way back there. Right. So God is, he's retaining that testimony that God always tells his servants, the prophets, what he's doing, because God is a truthful God and he's upright. And the point is he's building a track record of his character that you can count on the things he says, right? And if he keeps things hidden, it's not to deceive us. It's not to keep things from us. It's to keep things from the enemy. Okay. So now we know Christ is keeping that veiled from them at this point, right? He doesn't keep it. He doesn't unveil it until he rises from the dead, because now there's nothing that Satan can stop, right? So he says this, and then he says, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming in the end of the world? And the reason is because they think when the temple is thrown down, that's the end of the world. Okay. So they assume the two things are happening at the same time, right? But we have to take into account the things that they were ignorant of because Christ hadn't revealed them yet. So Christ is going to give them an answer for two things at once. But if you understand the prophecies, because he's going to get into Daniel, all of Daniel's prophecies start out talking about something at that time in history or around that time in history. And then all of a sudden they start trailing into something that happens in the last days. Every single one of Daniel's prophecies are like that. And Christ is giving a prophecy about something Daniel's talked about, and he's going to use the same style because he's a prophet. Okay. So what he's going to do is he's going to give them something that is going to lead up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, but then he's going to go forward and it's going to continue on to what happens in the last days. So we know there's going to be some similarities between what happens in 70 AD and then what happens in the last days. So that's kind of why when you see, if I teach on Hebrews or Jude or whatever, the reason I'm focusing on all these problems that the Jews are having before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is because you're probably going to see a lot of things with the Jews and the Christians in the last days that are going to be very similar to that, at least spiritually similar, right? Because they're deceived in a very similar way, right? Into thinking we're going to take over the world, and then no, it doesn't work out like that, and they need Jesus to save them. So,
Right.
So you want to remember what he's about to tell them is something that starts out in the present tense and then it's going to roll into the end times. Okay, so if you're dealing with a preterist and somebody who believes all these things were already fulfilled, you don't want to like disregard them and just say you're wrong. This is about the end times. You want to acknowledge what they're saying and say you're right. This is about 70 AD, but also about the end of times. And you want to show them, like in Luke 17 and other prophecies that we'll get into, how this is normal for prophets to prophecy in this way. It's not something we're just pulling out because it makes it work along the lines of our theory. Okay, make sense?
Right.
Okay. So the two questions again are, when will these things be, the destruction of the temple, and then what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age? Okay. So he says that, and let's have one of you now read from 4. Down to 14.
Want me to go?
Go ahead, Tyson. I'm trying to get this Zoom set up because they're trying
That's
to
cool.
cut me off.
I got you. All right, verse 4. And Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginnings of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
Okay. So if we know that what he's saying is when will be your coming in the end of the world, right? What was the last thing he just said at the end of verse 14?
And then shall the end come.
And then shall the end come. So before we get into any other specific details, I mean, there's a lot of details we're going to get into right here, but what's the main thing we know about everything that leads up to this point?
Say that one. What's the question one more time?
If the question they ask is when will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world, and he gives you all this stuff and then says, and then shall the end come. What do we know about this whole block of text that he's saying?
A lot of lies, a lot of falsehood, a lot of, persecution.
But more specifically in relation to their question.
All of these things should happen before the end comes.
Before the end comes, right?
Uh-huh.
So this is important because they're asking him, when is the sign of his coming in the end of the age, right? Now, has Jesus already explained some stuff about his coming in the end of the age? I mean, before this passage here, has Jesus already told him some stuff about his coming in the end of the age?
In Luke 17.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we already know Luke 17 is he's already told him about what the day of his appearing is like, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when they say when is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, right? We already know when he appears, you're supposed to flee Jerusalem and you're going to see one taken, one left. They already know that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're asking when's the sign of your coming in the end of the age, can you understand why they're saying how will we know when that's coming? Right? The thing that he already told them, right? See, so they're not even pulling this whole thing about you're coming in the end of the age out of nowhere. They're pulling it out of what he already told them in Luke 17, right? Mm-hmm. They're asking him this question about because he's saying, don't believe this, and I'm going to appear like lightning in the sky, but they're like, but when's that going to be? Like, how do we know that that's coming, right? Uh-huh. So now he gives you all of this, okay? And he says that's all going to be before that, right? So this is a summary of everything that you're going to see before that, okay? Uh-huh. So if we know this, and he's saying it to his disciples, now people are going to say, well, this is a Jewish audience, so this doesn't apply to Gentiles, or if you guys meet dispensationalists, they're the people basically who are going to convince you that we're going to be raptured before any of this happens. They do that because their hermeneutic dictates that some of this stuff wasn't meant for us Gentile Christians. This was just for those Jews, and they basically come up with these theories like we're only supposed to listen to Paul's letters. So there's a baseline for why they assume that. But I mean, if you're a disciple of Jesus, which we all are, all Christians are, Jew and Gentile, okay? Are you supposed to see all this? I'm assuming we're alive.
Yes.
Yes. In the simplest way you can put it, why?
Because he describes these things, and then he says, then the end shall come.
Then the end come. Okay. Yeah. So when we went back in Luke 17, we know when he comes, he's appearing like lightning, right? Mm-hmm. So do you remember what I told you to make sure you know is before that? What was before that?
That so if anybody says see, he's over here or he's over there, that's not what we're looking for.
Right. So we can assume that's before that too, right?
Correct.
Okay, so they're going to say that later on in this passage, but is there anything in what he said that might be similar to that, seeing he's here or he's there?
Within what we just read?
Yeah.
Like when he says, for many, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name saying I am Christ and shall deceive many.
Okay. So could we say safely that's a pretty safe way to assume he's talking about the same thing, with people saying, see, here he is, see, there he is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll get a second witness to nail that down, but I want to make that point that those things seem similar, okay? And then we're going to nail it down specific. Because this is a major thing, that if you're getting into people contending over the order of events and how to interpret this, these things are things that you're going to want to nail down for them. And I'll have that in bullets as this PowerPoint goes forward, but I want to just talk it through right now. So we know this, he's saying, there's going to be people saying, see, here he is, see, there he is, because there's going to be people saying, I'm Christ and I'm Christ, right? We have that in the world today. We have people who are saying they're actually Jesus Christ, right? And
Right.
that's going to increase. And we're going to have false Christ, and we're going to have people saying the Antichrist is here. And then one of these guys is going to deceive, he's going to stand at the temple. He's going to get to that point, right? But he's not going to be the only one who's claiming to be Christ. There's going to be a bunch of people claiming to be Christ, and it's going to be just a lot of confusion, okay? And that's why Jesus is saying, they're going to say, see here and see there. That's not me. You'll know when it's me, okay? So we know that's the general context that's going to be going on in that time, right? That's going to be people longing for the days like the days of the Son of Man, right? And people saying, uh-oh. Oh, did you just do that? Did you just upgrade the meeting?
Yeah, I upgraded it.
Okay, so now we can talk as long as we want?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good, because I don't know how to talk short. So we know this is happening before, and I know I'm going to just be really redundant with this, but that's a main point, that there's going to be false Christ leading up to his appearing, okay? And so then what's next? What do we have here? Verse 6 and 7.
You want me to read it again?
Well, no, just go ahead and summarize that, because we already heard you read it.
Okay. So we'll see war, and nations against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famine, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places. So basically what's described as the beginning of sorrows.
Right. So if we have all these things building up, can you think of anything that seems similar to, we have false Christs, wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes? Can we think of anything similar to that we know in the Bible?
As a previous story?
Well, not necessarily a previous, just from your basic Bible knowledge.
Like Daniel, go back to Daniel, right?
Well, we're gonna go there in a minute, but I just want to see what you guys know off the top of your head from other things that you've heard.
I say Egypt.
Those are similar to the plagues you saw in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to take you to something, and this is cheating, because I told you we weren't going to go to Revelation, so you don't want to rely on this evidence necessarily, but when you get there, you want to go back to Matthew 6, okay? So if you go to Revelation 6, when they're opening this scroll, I want you to pay attention to the order that these things are in, okay? The first thing is someone on a white horse, and he has a bow and a crown giving to him, and he goes forth to conquering and conquer, okay? So he's got a bow, but he's on a white horse, and he's going to conquer, okay? These are all spiritual beings. The second one is on a red horse, and he takes peace from the earth, right? And he has people kill each other, okay? The third one, it says, he that sat on him has a pair of balance in his hand, and he says, he heard the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny. See that thou hurt now the oil and the wine. And based on the wages back then, what they're saying is food's getting expensive, okay? So it's describing famine. And then the fourth one, it says that they're going to kill the fourth part of the earth with sword, hunger, and death, and the beasts of the earth, okay? And then we see the fifth one, and we see, it says, I saw under the altar the souls of those who were slain for the word of God and the testimony that they had. So we have people getting persecuted and killed. Okay. And then talks a little bit about that. And then the sixth seal, he says there was a great earthquake and the sun became black as sackcloth as hair and the moon became like blood. So if you have those 6 seals in order, you have a man on a white horse, that's false Christ. Red horse, that's wars. Black horse, that's famine. And then the 4th one is a pale horse, and that's death from various causes, okay? And then you have the 5th one, that's people being martyred and killed. And then the 6th one is earthquakes and these signs in the heavens, okay? So now let's go back to Matthew 24, what Jesus was talking about. In order, you have false Christ, wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, so that's part of the wars, famines, pestilences, which a lot of people die from, that's a plague, right? And then earthquakes. So Jesus just described the 6 seals, summarized, right? Summarizes all the stuff as leading up to his coming, but I wanted to show you how they line up. Like I have charts and stuff like that line them up, but just you'll want to look at those carefully. So when you're in Revelation, you want to show that that's pointing to what Jesus came and said, okay? So if we know that, what do we know about the seals in Revelations being opened up in Revelation 6? Is that before or after Christ coming?
Before.
Before or after the rapture?
Before.
Before. Okay, it's pretty plain, right? It's before. And again, we're still in the part where he says, and then the end shall come, okay? So he says, all these are the beginnings of sorrows, okay? This word sorrows is a word that means like tribulations or birth pangs. So what he's saying is this is like the beginning of contractions. You're going into labor, right? When you get to Revelation 12, you actually have a woman giving birth, okay? But this is the beginning of going into labor. So it's like the way you would describe it is you've gone into labor. Does it start out easy or hard?
It starts out easy.
Starts out easy, right?
Yeah.
And you have breaks and pauses in between it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you start out with your first contraction and you know the baby's coming, right? You even have false alarms and stuff like that, right? And then it starts to get more intense, and then, okay, it's time, right?
Right.
So they describe it that way because these things, that's how it's going to be. It's going to be like tough and then chill out a little bit, then tough, then chill out a little bit, right? So it's like we can look at things that have happened just in our lifetime, and it's like we see, I mean, I got saved in the year 2000, right? And all of a sudden I started seeing a bunch of people falling away from the Lord. Just a bunch of apostasy in the world. And then all of a sudden 9/11 happens and we start going into war. That's like a year later. And that gets super intense. And then all of a sudden 2008, the economy crashes. Now we're in a plague, right? Like, so you see the order of things, right? I mean, it's the same order, right? Now, am I saying that we're in these things right now? I'm going to say, I think so. What I'm not going to say is definitely, like this is past or this one's past, because when you get to the 4th seal, when it talks about killing people of all these various kinds of things, it leads to a quarter of the earth being killed. It says the 4th part of the earth is killed. So what we see going on right now is the beginnings, but it's going to get more intense terrorism, more intense wars, more intense economic upheaval, more intense plagues and pestilences and government abuses and persecutions and stuff like this. So we're probably in the early stages of this, right? And so Jesus gives these things in an order so you can kind of reconcile it with Revelation, and you can kind of reconcile it with the times that we're living in, but we know it's going to intensify. So, we might have all of a sudden the economy gets good, but the war gets worse. And then all of a sudden the war gets better, but the economy gets worse. And all of a sudden the economy gets better, but the plagues get worse. But the point is, it's just going to keep growing. Everything is going to grow like birth pangs. It's going to keep getting more and more intense as time goes on. And this intensity is not going to quit until 25% of the earth is killed. So one of the things I noticed, me and my friends were looking at like abortion statistics and how many babies have been aborted. Like just this year alone, over 10 million babies have been aborted. So, I mean, we've had abortions legal in this country since the 70s, but in places like Russia and Soviet Union, China, way more, right? And what I believe, I'm coming to believe, is that the reason God kills a quarter of the earth is because we probably killed a quarter of the earth in abortions alone by that time. You know, like they're promoting abortions left and right. And China had, even for like, I mean, even now you can't legally have more than 2 kids. So they force a lot of people to get abortions. But they just changed it to 2 kids from 1 kid, like in the past 10 years. It was like from like, I want to say like the 60s on. So, I mean, you're talking about 50, 60 years where you're only allowed to have 1 kid. And you know, people don't just get pregnant one time, even if you're trying not to get pregnant, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you can imagine. I read a book in Soviet Russia, and it said your average woman had 9 abortions. So, if you can imagine, the Soviet Union was around since like I think it started in like the 1920s, and it collapsed in like the 1990s. So, you're talking about 70 years of your average woman probably having half a dozen abortions. Think of how many babies were aborted just in Soviet Russia, right? So, God hates he hates the death of the innocent, and he will avenge that blood. And so what we're probably going to see when this happens on a global scale is a retribution for all these abortions that we've had for the past century, because it's mostly been the past century. You didn't really, unless you were too poor to take care of your baby, you didn't kill your babies before that. This is a pretty recent thing. I mean, you had people like really poor people leaving their babies and stuff like that. But this idea of like an economically based abortion where you're just like, I'm just not ready, you know what I mean? And just getting it done, that didn't exist before this century. And so what we're seeing is probably the world reaping what it sows in a really big way. But you see, these are all the beginnings of sorrows, right? So these are almost like the general revelation of God's wrath upon the earth. We're reaping what we're sowing in this really big way, right? And then we see in verse 9, he says, they will deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. So we see in these things the first 4 seals, and then the 5th seal is martyrdom, right? All martyrs who die for their testimony. Right, and it says, and then many shall be offended and shall betray one another and hate one another. So this is what's going to happen in the church. And so this is another reason why we know we're not quite there yet, because we do see Christians getting persecuted throughout the world. But what we're seeing is it's going to get to the point where your own relatives are turning you out, and your Christians are betraying Christians unto death. That's how you know it's like we're in the end, right? Because you're going to have people, or in other parts of Jesus's ministries, when he's talking about persecution, he's saying that there's a time will come when people will claim, when they put you to death, that they're doing God a service or a ministry. So you're going to have things get so apostate in the church where it's like, if you're speaking the truth, they're going to start to make enemies out of you, even in the church. They're going to call you enemies. So there's something coming that's worse. And that's why I'm so up in arms about the QAnon stuff. And, you know, if you guys watch any of my videos, the 7 Mountains Mandate and Dominionism, this whole idea of Christians taking over the government, because I'm like, that's how they got the Roman Catholic Church, and it ended up killing true Christians, right? Like, while these fake Christians ended up taking over the government. So it's like, there's never been a time in church history where the church was in control of the government and it went well. Usually there was a lot of persecution if the church was in control of the government, because it was usually the false Christians who were in charge. So it says, and many false prophets will arrive and deceive many. So we already know there's going to be false Christs running around, people who are actually claiming to be Jesus. And then we're going to have false prophets as well. So they're going to be pointing to various signs and stuff like that. And we can see a lot of that even today, right? I mean, look how many people are out there saying essentially that, you know, God is going to make Trump overturn this election and stuff like that, right? They're saying it all over the television, you know, and it's like, at this point, now God can do a miracle. I'm not saying God can't do a miracle, right? But like, how can you be so sure about Donald Trump that you think like God is going to flip over our legal system? Because you know, if he got into the office, it's going to be very, very intensely hot, right? You're talking about he lost by 5 million votes, right?
Yeah.
and lost the Electoral College, and they're saying, well, it's fraud. And it's like, okay, well, prove it. You better prove it very clearly, you know. And if he won and all these, you know, Christians were backing him up, there's gonna be something weird going on. So you have that, And then he says, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. So in other words, the world is going to get to a point where you just don't trust anybody. Nobody trusts anybody, right? People are isolating themselves, keeping to their own. Probably a lot of people keeping to their tightest communities and their family alone, right? But even you're going to have betrayals in households. In some of his other passages, he says, you know, I'm going to turn mother against father and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. And, you know, a man's enemies will be them of his own household. So it's probably going to get to the point, like, if you remember Nazi Germany, how the kids would be turning in parents and stuff like that. Like that kind of stuff is probably going to be happening worldwide. So we're probably seeing the beginning of that kind of persecution. Because, like, I'll just give you an example. One of my friends, they have a really big family. This is my friend Daryl's wife. And they have, like, I want to say they have, like, it's a lot. I want to say it's like 11 kids or 14 kids. It's a lot, right? And their neighbor, because we actually have a mandate from our governor that you're not supposed to have more than 10 people over for Thanksgiving. And if they just had just their kids over, and their kids are all now married and have kids, right? So their Thanksgiving is like 40 people.
Right.
One of their neighbors told them that they're going to be watching them, and they're going to turn them in if they have just their family over for Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Right? Like that's how it's getting. I mean, that's how intense it's getting just over this virus, right? So you know, you got people ready to go to persecute Christians. They're just waiting for it to be socially acceptable to do so, right? Like there are people who just flat out hate you because of your faith, but they don't want to be seen as a bad person, so they don't come out about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it's socially acceptable to hate Christians, you're going to see it. Just like in Germany, there was, you know, there were a lot of people who hated Jews before the Nazis came, but it wasn't socially acceptable to just start, you know, attacking people you get arrested for, right? Well, what happens when law and order is not going the way of, you know, righteousness, right? So he says all that, and then he says, but he that shall endure till the end shall be saved. So what do you think he means by endure to the end?
Finish the race, as Paul said.
Right. So he's talking spiritually enduring to the end, right? Not like those who manage to physically make it will be saved, right?
Right.
Okay, but there will be people that physically make it, but God's making the point, endure to the end. In other words, you hold on to your faith in Christ until the end, because this is going to get hot, right?
Right.
And then he says, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all the nations, and then the end come, okay? So what has to be happening at the time of the end?
The gospel being preached
Where's the gospel preached?
in all the world.
Everywhere, right?
Yep.
So does that mean there's going to be just a few Christians left on the earth?
No.
There got to be quite a few, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily that there's going to be a big, huge revival necessarily, but you have to have enough Christians on the earth to have the gospel be preached everywhere in the earth at the time of the end, right?
Right.
So do you think they're going to be having Christians on the television set?
No, not at that time.
No. Do you think they're going to be all over the internet?
No.
Probably not. Like this kind of thing right here is probably going to be blocked from happening, right?
Right.
So we need Christians physically in place all over the earth, right?
Yep.
So when we get into Revelation chapter 7, you know how he seals 144,000 witnesses?
Mm-hmm.
That's just for Israel. So it's going to be the same thing there, right? You need people going into every little town and village in Israel to preach the gospel, house to house, probably very low key, very discreet, right?
Yeah.
And you need 144,000 to get to all of it, because you have a few years to do this, right? I mean, the kind of stuff that we're doing, we just happen to meet on the internet, right? But it's like you're going to be like meeting people around the way that are open to hearing about the gospel. Next thing you know, you're teaching to a few people in the house, and it's very low key because everyone's going to be so scared of the government and whatnot, right? That it's like Jesus is coming. I'm telling you guys, you're warning people, and then probably a lot of these people who are warning people end up getting killed, and then somebody else goes on telling people. But the point is God is going to make sure at the time of the end, the gospel is being preached everywhere in the world, right?
Right.
So when you hear about the Jews fleeing Judea and seeing one taken, one left, I'm going to shortcut you to the end, but they're going to be either seeing Christians or some of those 144,000 that are sealed to preach the gospel until the end. And then that remnant of Jews who listened are going to flee into the wilderness. But the point they're making is the reason they're seeing one taken, one left, is because God still has saints all over the world. So no matter where you are in the world, you're going to witness the rapture. It's not just going to be some secret thing like, where did they go? Everybody's going to know where they went.
Right.
So this is a summary, and this is, again, Revelation's going to get into this in more detail. We're going to have Daniel get into it in more detail, but this is a summary of what's going to go on, progressively getting more intense until the end. But also at the same time, the gospel is going to successfully be preached, right? I mean, when you think about it like this, right now we have our things to be concerned about, right? We've got our jobs, we've got our homes, we've got our families, right?
Right.
But when they take all that away from you, and it's coming, to degrees, obviously we're not all going to suffer to the same degree, but when they take that all away from you, what are you going to be telling people everywhere you go?
The gospel.
Right. I mean, you're telling this is the end times. This is it. Jesus is coming back. He told us this was going to happen. We're not just going to be like, oh man, this sucks. They take my stuff, right? This is wrong. They take my stuff. I mean, worldly, carnal people are going to be like that, right?
Right.
But the reality is it's going to be to us. It's going to be a testimony to us that it's like Jesus says, rejoice when they do all this to you for my name's sake. Because two reasons. One is if they're doing it for my name's sake, that means that you have a witness and a testimony in you that they don't like, right? Because they hated Christ.
Right.
And so you got evidence beaming out of you that you're saved, right?
Right.
But two is the worse it's getting, the closer Jesus getting back is. And so we're actually getting excited, right? So every ear you have to listen, you're going to be like, oh man, why are you locked up? Because you're going to have the people who are locked up for crack and locked up for murder and locked up for all this other stuff, right? And what are you locked up for? Oh man, I'm a Christian. They locked me up because blah, blah, blah. And you're probably going to have a lot of these people who were just like in Jesus' day, right? Who is coming to Jesus when the Pharisees were rejecting him?
Right.
Right. The criminals, right? The prostitutes, tax collectors weren't criminals necessarily, but you know what I'm saying? Like it was the low life of society that was all coming to him. And we're probably, if we're locked up, it's going to be a lot of these people who are like, oh, I want out, because they don't have anything in this world, right?
Right.
And there's probably be a lot of people who are just poor. There's going to be a lot of people where we're going to find ourselves amongst because of our circumstances. And that's how the gospel is going to be preached everywhere. And for all we know, we're going to have Christians in every prison in the world, right? And so the gospel is being preached in every city because in every prison and jail there's Christians, right?
Right.
So, but the point is that's what you want to kind of hold in your heart, is that these two things are going on side by side. As the circumstances of the world are getting rougher and rougher and rougher, and the circumstances for Christian are getting rougher and rougher and rougher, we can know and have this assurance that hang on, because it's going to get good, right? Because Jesus is going to come back and clean this up, right? So now we're going to get to the sign, right? Because all this stuff is not yet the end. And he's saying all this is going to happen and then the end shall come. So this is not yet the end. So his question was the sign. What's the sign of your coming? Okay. So now let's have one of you guys read verse 15 and go ahead and read verse 15 to 22.
I got it. All right. So when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them which give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened.
Okay. So this is a summary. What does it sound like that we know already?
70 AD.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because when 70 AD happened, the Jews fled out of Israel, and they were saying, "Woe to anybody who leaves on the Sabbath," and I mean, not woe to anybody who leaves on the Sabbath, but not to leave in the Sabbath, because that applies specifically to Jews who kept the Sabbath.
So he's dealing with Jerusalem, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 70 AD, did the Christians stay in Jerusalem when it was destroyed? No, they were out, right? So they understood this, and you can get these hints if you're reading Hebrews and Jude carefully, that they're hinting strongly for them to get out of the city, right? But you have that going on, and the Christians aren't falling for it, but the Jews actually were falling for it. The Jews weren't actually fleeing, and that's why they end up in the city, and the city gets burned to the ground and all this stuff, right? So there were some Jews that fled, but for the most part, the Jews that fled were Christians, Jewish Christians that fled. Okay. So this part does have some connotation to 70 AD, but how do we know this is about the last days?
Because he just got done talking about, then the end shall come. And then he says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place. And then he said, whoso readeth, let him understand. I believe that right there shows you that it's not just talking about 70 AD.
Yeah, when he says, when ye therefore see, right?
Right.
So he's saying, then shall the end come. And so he's saying, when ye therefore see. So that's actually a pretty good Greek translation. This word hotan means whenever, or at the time when, then, or therefore. So at the time that therefore you see the abomination of desolation. And so when he's saying therefore, he's specifically relating it back to the end coming, right?
Right.
So what else does this remind you of when he's talking about fleeing and not looking back?
The days a lot.
The days a lot, right?
Yeah.
And where did we read that?
Luke 17.
Yeah, see, I'm actually surprised that none of this, you see, there's no cross references back to Luke 17 here. I'm surprised, which means that's probably not that common of an understanding, even though, again, if you get your chronology right, we know they heard Luke 17 before this. So he's attaching this to Luke 17, right? Mm-hmm. So we know, remember, in Luke 17, he says, when you see Christ appear in the clouds, flee the city, right?
Right.
Well, here he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, flee the city.
Right.
So what do we know about those two things?
They happen on the same day.
Right. They got to be at least really close together, right?
Right.
So we know that's when they're fleeing, okay? And so it says, pray that your flight be not in Sabbath, but there will be great tribulation. So we know that this great tribulation starts at the abomination of desolation, okay?
Right.
So a lot of people who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, they're going to point to this verse and say, we're not going to be around for the great tribulation. But they don't realize that the great tribulation doesn't start till the abomination of desolation happens. That's what they get mixed up on. So he's saying then, and this word then is going to be important because you're going to see it a lot. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, you have this word then, tote, okay? So tote can mean then, like immediately after that, or then at that time, or it could actually even mean then before that or around that time, okay? But we know because he's saying when you see the abomination of desolation, when he's saying when here, we know that then means after that, right? When and then, okay? Mm-hmm. But that's important that you know that word tote can have a lot of different connotations. So when they're saying then, it can mean around that time or in that era of time, okay? So he talks about the great tribulation, and then he says, and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days should be shortened. And I get into a lot of speculative details about this in my book, but what do you think he's saying here? What do you think he's inferring?
I think it's inferring that they're going to be taken. The elect are going to be taken.
Those days will be shortened, right?
Right.
So something on earth is about to happen. This great tribulation is going to be so bad that it might destroy all flesh, but he says for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened, right? So, for the elect's sake, right? So that is one way of saying that the elect will be taken. They won't be there for those days, right? Those days will be shortened. He can't cause the days to be shorter, right? I mean, he could, but that would be for everybody's sake and not for the elect's sake, right?
Right.
So if it's something that's just for the elect's sake, it has to be something that happens with them, but not everybody else, right?
Right.
So either Jesus is shortening the days for the sake of the elect, or he's doing something just with the elect that's making the days shorten for them, right? That's the two ways you could read that. So it seems to be inferred that he's going to do something. Excuse me.
Bush.
Seems to be inferred that he's going to do something with the elect, right?
Yeah.
So now he says this, then, and that's that word tote again, okay? This is why I wanted to show you this, because that word then could mean right after that, right? But it can also mean at that time. And he says, then if any man say to you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. Where does that sound familiar?
Luke 17.
Luke 17. Now, we just established that this abomination of desolation has happened in the same day as Christ appearing in the clouds, right?
Right.
Remember from Luke 17, when they're saying, lo, here is Christ, there is Christ, is that before that or after that? We can click the link right here.
Yeah, I just clicked mine.
It says you should see here, see there, go not after them or follow him, right?
Right.
Neither shall they say, lo here or lo there, right?
Right.
And he said, they shall say, see here and see there, go not after them, right? For as lightning that lighteth on one part of the heaven shines to another, so shall the Son of Man be in that day. So are they saying that before or after?
Before.
Before, right?
Yeah.
So until Christ gets there and everyone sees him, they're going to be trying to convince you that these other people are Christ, right?
Right. Yep.
So that's important, because when we go back to Matthew 24, he says, then let them flee in the mountains. Those are the people that's right after the abomination of desolations. And then down here in verse 23, after saying those days will be shortened, he says, then if any man say to you, lo, here is Christ, or there is Christ, believe it not. Is he talking about after this or something before this?
Something before.
Before this abomination of desolation happens, right?
Right.
Okay, so this is where most people get confused. And this is what I think, if you had this in the right kind of format, what you would have is these would be your paragraphs, right? Then shall the end come would be the end of a paragraph, right?
Right.
And then he's going to say this right here, and he's going to say, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. That's the end of a paragraph, okay? And then he's saying, tote, if any man say. So he's saying that time, meaning around that time, or in that era leading up to this, right? He's going to say, lo, here is Christ, lo, there, believe it not. And he says, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets that shall show great sign and wonders, insomuch as if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before, okay? Now look at this. He says right here, behold, I have told you before, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did he tell you before?
Just in the same chapter.
Right. I mean, look at right above you. It says, verse 24:5. Just go up here, right?
Right.
He told you right here, many will come in my name saying, I am Christ, and deceive many, okay? This right here is, so there's people who believe in a pre-wrath rapture, and there's some differences there, and I won't get into all those details right now. But this is where they get stuck. They think this is after that. So now they think there's an abomination of desolation, and then after that we have these other false Christs. But Jesus is saying, I told you before. He's saying, go back to what I told you before. So he's like, he leads you up to this point of the abomination of desolation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he leads you up to this point of the days being shortened to elect, right? Now he's leading you up to this point again, and he's going to describe the rapture, okay? So that's kind of how Jesus communicates, because he does everything in layers where he keeps bringing you back, right? Because he's doing things with 2 or 3 witnesses, right?
Giving you more details of the same event.
Right. And if you understand how the whole Bible is laid out, especially with prophecy, he gives you a prophecy, and then he comes back and gives it with more details. Then he comes back and gives it with more details. And then the most detailed version is the book of Revelation, because it puts it all in order, and you have all these different prophecies tied together, okay?
Right.
So here he says, behold, I have told you before, and then he says, wherefore, if they say unto you, now he's expounding on the lo, he is here, lo, he is there, right?
Right.
He said, wherefore, if they say to you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth, or behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not, okay? Now we're going to study Daniel, and we're going to understand why he's in the secret chambers. What do you think the secret chambers is referring to?
Temple.
Temple. What part?
The holies of holies.
Right. That's the secret chambers, right? That's the inner room of the temple, right? What do you think the desert's then referring to?
Middle East.
Middle East, right? So this is just what we think in general, just looking at it, right? We're going to get into details when we go to study Daniel to see how that's very specific. He tells you what countries he goes into in the Middle East and takes them over, and then he goes into the temple and claims that he's God. So he's specifically pointing to that to say, don't believe it, because they're going to tell you he's in the desert, that's Christ. And then they're going to tell you he went into the Holy of Holies, that's Christ, right? And he's saying, don't believe it. He's telling you specifically, there's going to be a bunch of false Christs, and one of them's going to win out. Of all these people claiming to be Christ or Messiah or whatever, one of them is going to win out and sit in the temple, right? That's the abomination of desolation. And when we get to Daniel's prophecies, we'll start covering those next week. That's when we start to get to those details of what that's going to look like. But he's already told you go study Daniel, so he's not going to expound all those details here, okay? Then he says, for as lightning comes out of the east and shines sun to the west, so shall the son of the coming man be, or the coming of the Son of Man be. So where are we now? In your timeline, where are we now?
At the abomination of desolation.
Right. So you see how you have this first part leads you right up to the abomination of desolation.
Right.
The second part leads you up to the days being shortened, right? This third part leads you up to the coming of the Son of Man, right?
Right.
But all three of those things are happening at the same time, right?
Wow.
Or at least in the same day, right?
Yeah.
And then he says this line, remember this one? For
Yep.
wheresoever the carcasses, the eagles will be gathered together, right?
Right.
So he just said, here comes the coming of the Son of Man, and then he gives you this cryptic line that we just found in Job, right? Lakia, did you see that part?
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
28.
yeah, I'm talking about where the eagles are, or where the carcasses, the eagles gathered. So
Yeah.
from what we read in Job, where are the eagles going?
Into the nest.
Right. Where's the nest?
In the high mountain.
Yeah, in the cleft of the rock, right?
Yeah.
So remember, you guys, I show this in some of my videos, but remember this rock right here, what this is? I can't even get it in front of the camera, right?
Jasper.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is what the New Jerusalem is going to look like on the outside. It's a golden city inside, but this is what it looks like on the outside. Its foundation and its outer wall is of jasper. So this is what we're going to see, right? And this is what we get caught up to. That's the cleft of the rock that the eagle goes to, right? So this metaphor about the eagle going up to the cleft of the rock with the slain for its young to eat is a metaphor about us getting raptured and taken up to this thing, right?
Yeah.
Get it? This is cool because so the reason I studied up on jasper and the reason it's blood red like this is because of the iron in it, and that's what's in our blood, right? So it's literally has a composition similar to your own blood, but it's a rock, right? So we're literally going to be covered by the blood and protected from the wrath. How's that?
The real Passover.
It's almost like something powerful playing this out. So then it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall give her light. Okay. So remember how everything starts back and leads you up to it? We've already had that 3 times, right?
Right.
So we know wherever the carcasses, the eagles will be gathered together is another one, right? That's the days shortened for the elect, right?
Right.
So now we have 1, the abomination of desolation. We have 2, the days of the elect being shortened. We have 3, Christ coming in the cloud and the eagles gathering, right? And now we have a 4th one. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give her light. And this is another place people get confused. They see this word tribulation and they assume they mean after this great tribulation.
Right. It just
This
says
is where your post-tribulation people come from, because they say it's after this great tribulation. I'm going to show you where their confusion comes from. So this word for tribulation is thalipsis.
Yep.
And I think I cover this in my book, but bear with me for a second. I'm going a little slow here. Immediately after the thalipsis, right?
Yep.
So you can just go over every use of this word here. It's in Matthew 3. See, it says when, look at this. This is Matthew 13. Remember, this is the parallel passage of it. It says, or I'm sorry, this is Matthew 13. This is talking about people who fall away, right? And he says, for him that has no root in himself and endureth for a while, when tribulation or persecution comes, so thalipsis, because of the word, he is offended. So we know it can be persecution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matthew 24:9, it says, this is in that same passage. He says, when they deliver you up to be afflicted, that word is thalipsis. So they're delivering you up to be afflicted and kill you, and you should be hated by all nations for my name's sake. That's thalipsis too, okay? So then we have megas thalipsis, that means great tribulation. So we know persecution, affliction, tribulation can all refer to our suffering for Christ. Right. But megas thalipsis only can refer to that great outpouring of God's wrath, okay? You go to Mark 13, and it says, for in those days shall be affliction, such as there was not from the beginning of Christian. So this just says affliction, thalipsis. But the main one you want to go back to is Matthew 24:9, because he's saying right there, they will deliver you up to be afflicted, and that word is thalipsis, okay? Right. So notice in Matthew 24:9, he's saying you're going to be killed and betrayed and all this stuff. The love of many will grow cold, but he that endures to the end shall be saved. And then the gospel will be preached, and then the end will come. So here's the thalipsis that they're going through until the end, okay? So when you get down here and he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. Do you remember where I pointed that out to you? See, because this is when you guys are teaching this to somebody else, people are going to ask you, how do you know that's talking about persecution and not the Great Tribulation, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's saying immediately after that, the sun will be darkened and the moon shall not give his light, okay? So that this is where people get the blood moon from. But I just took you to that just a minute ago. Right. I said, I beheld when he opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as Sarah's sackcloth, and the moon became as blood, okay? So we know those two things line up, right? Because the sun turns to darkness, the moon turns to blood, right? But right before that, we have, when I opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar them who were slain for the word of God, for the testimony that they held. So see how we don't have anything about the abomination of desolation here. We don't have anything about fleeing Jerusalem here. What we have here is persecution for the word of God. And then he says, when will you judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And their white robes were given to them, and it was said to them that they should rest for a little season until their fellow servants also and their brethren that they should be killed as they were would be fulfilled. So he's talking about right there that tribulation or persecution that goes up until the end. And so now he's saying immediately after the tribulation in those days, because remember, that's the tribulation that's going to happen because of the false prophets and the false Christ, right? They're the ones that are going to get you persecuted, right? Mm-hmm. He says, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from your heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Now these things right here, the stars, all these things are in Revelation 6, okay? And then he says, but these things also, the powers of the heaven will be shaken. This is also going to encompass all the signs that are in the seven trumpets, because you have fire falling from heaven, you have a star called wormwood that falls, you have a bunch of different signs in the heaven that happen. So this is just summarizing all that, okay? And then he says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and the tribes in the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So now see how he's taking you back again to, when lightning flashes in the east and shines in the west, right? So he keeps taking you up to that point over and over and over again. See, a lot of people are going to want to take this and just read this as a straightforward narrative. And you need to explain to him that, no, he's taking you to that same point again and again and again and again, right? He just keeps on doing it, okay? Right. So he says, and then he says, they'll see the Son of Man coming with power and great glory, and he shall send out his angels with the sound of a great trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So is that unclear that that's talking about the rapture?
Man, that's clear.
It's very clear, right?
Right.
I mean, he said it 4 different times.
He said it in 4 different ways. Like he said, the days are going to be shortened for the elect. Then he said the Eagles thing is the metaphor. Now he's saying it flat out, right? So he's told you 3 different ways that the same day that the abomination of desolation happens, you're going to see Christ in the cloud and he's going to gather elect. He's told you 3-4 times, like every last detail of that. And it lines up with what we read in Luke 17, right? So even without Paul's writings and even without the book of Revelation or any of that stuff, you know what he needs you to know, which is you're going to have all these wars and craziness going on and then persecutions going on, but hold tight and don't be deceived by anyone claiming to be Christ, because here's how it's going to go down. This abomination of desolation is going to happen. This man in the Holy of Holies claiming to be God. And then I'm going to come and show up and I'm going to rescue y'all and they're all going to get it who believed him. So that's
what's funny? Like with the pre-trib, it doesn't even match the birth pains metaphor. Because if we're taken before any of this starts, which is what a lot of people believe, I see it on my Facebook all the time now. They believe that before any of the persecution starts, we're going to be taken, and we're not going to see the Antichrist at all.
Right. You know? Yeah. And when we get into Thessalonians, we will. It's if you've studied this stuff in the order that it was given, it's so obvious when you get to 2 Thessalonians that he's telling them flat out. What does he say he's going to do? They're going to gather together his elect, right? And you get to 2 Thessalonians and they're saying, now regarding our gathering together unto him, don't let anyone deceive you in saying it happens before the man sits in the temple and says he's God, right?
Right.
Because Jesus just told them that 3 different ways. And Luke 17, right? And then he's told them to study Daniel, and Daniel's going to tell them too, right? And we're going to show you that all in metaphors, okay? So like the next one we get into, we'll start getting into Daniel's prophecies, because Daniel has like 4 different prophecies that he does the same kind of thing. Like he's going to talk about this period called the times of the Gentiles, which really starts from the Jews' captivity to the point when they're finally, the kingdom is there, the material kingdom is there, okay? And so he's gonna jump from Christ's first coming to his second coming, and the reason is because the kingdom comes twice, right? But the spiritual kingdom and the literal kingdom. But you don't know it because it's even more veiled in Daniel. Christ is making that more clear. And then when you get to the apostle teaching, it's obvious, right? We're preaching the kingdom of heaven. We're in the kingdom of heaven, but the kingdom's also coming, right?
Right.
So he says all of these things, and then he's gathering his elect. So he's leading you up to the rapture every time. He's not telling you about anything after the rapture. He's just saying there's going to be a great tribulation after that, but he's not giving you any details about Armageddon or about anything, because he's answering their question. What was their question?
Go back to verse 2.
Yeah.
Verse 3. It says, tell us when these things shall be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world.
So that's a simple question, right? They're not asking you like, what's the outpouring of your wrath going to look like? They're asking you how do we know when what's going to happen right before you get here, right? Like, what's the sign going to be? So what is if you had to take all this and say, what is the sign of his coming?
When the abomination of desolation is set up.
That's the main thing, right?
Yeah.
Because that kicks off everything else. So we know the Jews, he tells them to flee when they see the abomination of desolation. He also says in Luke 17 that the day that he appears, they'll be fleeing. So we know he shows up probably pretty closely after the abomination of desolation happens, right?
Right.
He doesn't just like, hey, the Antichrist doesn't get away with that for that long. Like that is like the straw that breaks the camel's back with God. Like you sat on my chair, right? Like you can go around trying to deceive people up to a point, but you actually sat on my chair now. And I'm gonna have to come get you off my chair. So that's what he's leading you up to. That's that main event, right? That everything culminates to. But we know the rapture happens right after that, right? So we don't have to worry about that great tribulation that's going to happen. That because it says for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened, right? He's telling us for our sake, we'll be all right. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be so bad it could kill everybody. But for our sake, it will be shortened because we're going to be caught up where the eagles are gathered, right? So, I think I want to just get into this parable of the fig tree, and then Matthew 25. I'll ask you guys to read that because that's more talking about spiritual quality. I mean, really, after the fig tree, the wise servant, verse 45, all the way through the end of Matthew 25 is talking about spiritual qualifications for being taken and not left. Okay.
Mm.
So that has more to do with your heart and your attitude, but it all boils down to this. If your heart's right, you're going to be watching and looking for Christ coming, right? You're not going to be telling yourself in your head, oh, it's a long way off, because as the world gets worse and worse, you're going to get more uncomfortable and you're going to want Christ to be here, right?
Right.
Comfortable in the world and you're just changing with the flow of the world. You're going to be like, no, I'm living a good life. Why would I want Christ to come back and wreck it, right?
Right.
So everything when you get from 45 on to 25, you want to read that because you want to know it, because that's heart stuff. Even in Luke 21, he's going to say, therefore watch that you be counted worthy to escape. And everything he's saying in Matthew 24 is really saying that, right? What's your heart like? What's your attitude like? What are you engaged with your time and your treasure and your opportunity, right? That is telling you, are you going to be one of these ones taken, or are you going to be one of these ones left behind? Because there are Christians who get left behind because they're not bearing any fruit. They believe, and they get their heads chopped off for not taking the mark of the beast after the abomination desolation, because they don't get raptured. So there are people that are genuine believers, but they're really not getting anything done. And so that's why he's telling you this, to be, where's your heart at? Where are you going to be at? Because one is, you might be saved, but you might have to get your head chopped off to prove it, because you weren't bearing any fruit before that, right?
Right.
And then he's also saying you might just not be saved, and you might think you were, and you end up going to hell. So he's warning you to check yourself and make sure you're bearing fruit and you're living for the Lord. Okay.
Right.
So then he says this.
Definitely read that.
He says this. He says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. And I just did a video. Oh no, I didn't. I was going to do that, and I didn't do it yet. Did I do a video on the parable of the fig tree?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm gonna have to put that up. We'll do a brief point about this, because remember how Jesus curses a fig tree?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, so he curses a fig tree right outside of the temple. That's actually a prophetic sign for the temple being destroyed. And he's saying, no more shall you bear fruit, because he's saying the temple is not going to any longer bear spiritual fruit, because he's taking the covenant away from them and giving it to the church, the new covenant, right?
Right.
And then he refers to, if you say to this mountain, go and be tossed in the sea. He's talking about the mountain of Jerusalem, because he's telling you the worship's going to go away from the mountain of Jerusalem and go to the Gentiles. And then he says the same thing about a sycamine tree, which is a type of fig tree, that you can toss it into the sea, because the fig tree is representing temple Judaism, right? So now he says this, now learn the parable of the fig tree. He also gives another parable of the fig tree, where he says how he goes around it for 3 years looking for fruit and not finding any. Well, he's talking about how he keeps coming up to Jerusalem into the temple for the Passovers every year, and they just keep rejecting him every time. And so he's telling them this over and over, and he's giving them all his parables about going to seek fruit, and them casting out his servants and killing his son and all this stuff, right? So we'll get into that more deeply, because I'll probably put a video out on that, because that's a lot of content in itself. But essentially, when you hear this, it's like when he says, when his branch is yet tender and put his forth leaves, you know that the summer is nigh. Now, do you remember when Adam and Eve covered themselves with leaves?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What kind of leaves were those?
Fig leaves.
Fig leaves, right?
Yeah.
So notice he says his branch is tender and he put his forth leaves, right? Is he bearing fruit?
Nope.
No, because he told the fig tree, you'll never bear fruit again, right? But it's putting forth leaves. So what do you think those leaves represent?
False works.
False works, right? Trying to cover up your own sin, like Adam and Eve did, right?
Like Adam and
So
Eve.
he's telling you this, that the fig tree is the temple, and he's putting forth false works, right? They're bringing back temple Judaism. You know that the summer is nigh, okay? It says, so likewise, when you should see all these things, so he's not just talking about the parable of the fig tree, but all these things, it's leading up to, I mean, that's the point, is where this is going is it's going to be leading up to false Judaism. And then the Antichrist sits in the temple, because that's what Jesus Christ does in Ezekiel 43. He comes from the gate of the east and he sits in the temple. But the Antichrist is going to come from the west and sit in the temple. And that's how it's not quite right. He's going to do something almost like what Christ does, but he's supposed to come from that gate in the east, that gate that I showed you that was blocked up.
Uh-huh.
But he's not going to come from that gate because it's blocked up. He's going to come from the opposite way, right? Now think about this. Think about this. What did Jesus say about the door? Remember that I am the door to the sheepfold? Anyone who comes in any other way is what?
Is a thief and a robber.
A thief and a robber, right? He's going to come in the other way. And I'm going to show you all that when we get to Daniel, right? He's literally going to come into the temple the opposite way that Jesus is going to come in, because that gate's going to be blocked up. Then when Jesus comes in, he's going to split them out and just open that up. So I'm gonna make a whole video on Jesus coming back and how he just trashes everything. He basically is just like, okay, are you gonna block up the door? Then I'm just gonna split the whole thing in two and just be like, I'm coming in. It's gonna be awesome. So he says, likewise, when you see all these things, you know that it's even at the door. And he says, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So this is how you know this is not 70 AD, right?
Mhm.
It is an allusion to things that are going to happen partially in 70 AD, but did all these things happen in 70 AD?
No.
No, I mean, you have to have Jesus Christ coming in the rapture, right?
Right.
All these things fulfill in this generation. Well, people are going to use this verse and say this generation and say that Jesus is saying is all this stuff is going to happen in the generation that he's speaking to, right?
Right.
He's not saying that, though. He's saying when you see all these things, this generation shall not pass. So he's saying the generation that sees all these things,
I knew it.
right?
I knew
Because
it.
they're going to try to catch you on that and say, see, he says this generation. No, when you see all these things, that generation didn't see all those things. It's the generation that sees all these things. And why do you think he has to tell them that?
Because they're going to go through a lot of similar things, and they need to still have faith that, the end has not come yet.
Right. So he wants you to have hope. That's one thing. The other reason is think of how many people could come through and say, oh, that part was fulfilled in 50 AD and that part was fulfilled in 270 AD. And that, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And then
Right.
all I have to do is fulfill this one sign and I'm the Christ.
Oh, this generation. So the generation that sees all those
You
things.
have to see all these things, right? The wars, the famines, the persecutions, all this stuff. And so when you see all the different times in the past, people say every generation thought they were the last generation, right?
Uh-huh.
But we know they were mistaken because they didn't see all these things. The generation that sees all these things is the last generation. So if we start seeing 5 out of 10 of these things, we should be looking for the other things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But if that generation passes away and only 5 out of 10, we can say, well, it looks like we're not the end times, right?
Right.
But we should be looking if we see 5 things, right? We should be
Right.
looking for all the things leading up to the abomination of desolation. So it's telling you that, one is if all these things didn't pass, so it's not a spiritual thing. It's not a metaphorical thing. It's not something that happened in the past. You have to see all these things. Most importantly, you have to see Jesus Christ coming in the clouds, right?
Right.
And then he says, verily I say unto you, this generation will not be passed away until all things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Okay? So he only says that about one other thing in his entire ministry. Heaven and earth will pass away, but do you remember that?
The law, Matthew 5.
Till all the law is fulfilled, right?
Right.
So that's the only other thing he says that about. So he's talking about in his first coming, right? Nothing, heaven and earth will pass away before one jot or tittle of the law fail. In other words, in his first coming, he's going to fulfill the whole law perfectly, right? In his second coming, all these things have to come to pass. Otherwise, it's not him. So he's telling you this, that it's just like, unless you see all these things, don't believe it. It's not him. Because there's going to be a lot of stuff happening. There's probably going to be a lot of, honestly, I believe this. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff similar to this in the downfall of America. So when that happens, people are like, oh, the Antichrist was killed. This must be Christ who's now reigning in the Middle East, right? And think about it like that.
Wow.
We are great Satan to all these people in the East, right?
Yeah.
So like if we all of a sudden New York City burns to the ground, they're like, oh, there goes Mystery Babylon, right? And but see, do you see how a lot of things could happen that are similar to this, but not exactly like this, and have people into thinking, oh, Christ must be here now, right?
Right.
Well, he's really setting you up to not be deceived by that. And then he says, but in terms of when exactly it's going to happen, he says, but of that day and hour no man knows, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Then he takes you right back to what he said in Luke 17. But as the days of Noah were, so shall be the day of the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered in the ark. And they knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So he's telling you that the wicked, this is going to be important when we get to Revelation. The wicked will not know until the flood comes, right? So one of the cornerstone doctrines of the people, the pre-wrath theory, is that they say in Revelation 6 they assume Christ comes here, and here's why. Verse 15, he says, and the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and the bondmen and every free man hid themselves in the dens of the rocks and in the mountains and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come. Who shall be able to stand? Are they right? One is, are these righteous or wicked people?
Wicked.
Wicked. How do we know that?
Because they're hiding.
They're hiding from the Lord, right? Are they correct when they're saying we need to go hide because his wrath has come? Are they correct that he's here?
No.
How do we know that?
Stars.
How do we know they're, from what we just read, and I'm going to go back to Matthew now, how do we know that they are wrong when they think that Christ has come?
Because that the tribulation just began. The stars that just fell from the sky. So
You're right about that the tribulation has just begun.
Pre-tribulation.
Right, you're right about that. Well, that's not even the great tribulation. What haven't we seen in Revelation 6? What do we need to see first? The Abomination, Desolation, right? But more importantly, we know this. He says they won't know until the flood comes, just like in Noah. They didn't know until the flood came, right?
Right.
So how are they going to have time to go run and hide in the caves? They didn't know until the flood came. He's saying when the Lord really comes, they're not going to see it coming. Right? It doesn't come with observation saying, lo, here it is, lo, there it is. He's going to suddenly appear. Everyone's going to see him, and he's going to start pouring out his wrath, and they're not going to be able to escape, right? So these people who think Christ is coming, they're going to flee underground. They're mistaken. That's how similar it's going to look. To these people. Remember, there's all kinds of unbelievers that know the contents of the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have people that, remember, aren't paying attention to all this and going, oh, every last one of those things has to occur, including the abomination of desolation and Christ appearing in the clouds, right? But they're going to see the sun turn to darkness and the moon turn to blood and all these powers of heaven and shaking, all this craziness going on. And I think the world's just going to kind of spin out of control for a little bit, and that's what's going to make it all look like the stars are falling. I actually had a dream about that once, but we'll see what happens. But these people are going to believe because of all the signs that they're seeing that Christ is here, and they're going to try to preemptively hide underground. But we know Christ is not here because they say they're not going to know it until it comes. So it's going to be like a false alarm that they're fleeing underground after, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to convince the naive, unbelieving world that was the coming of, or that was the wrath of God. And then when the Antichrist starts to rise, they're going to be deceived by it, thinking that's Christ. Because they're not looking for him coming in the clouds like they should be, right?
Right.
So then he says, and they knew not until the flood came and took them away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Now remember how we attached the Noah thing, Noah's Ark, to the rapture in Luke 17? Look at what he said. Look what he says right after that. Then shall be two in the field, one shall be taken and the other left. Two women shall be grinding in the mill, one shall be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, so you know not, because you know not what hour the Lord comes. See? So he's telling you right here, flat out, just like Noah's Ark, we know they're going to be taken. One's going to be taken and one's going to be left. And then the wrath is going to be poured out. Just like you're going to be put into the ark and God closes the door and then the flood comes out, right? So you see how all these things that he says in Luke 17 are kind of mixed and matched?
Uh-huh.
Like it's not the exact same flow. That's how you kind of know. I want to give you kind of an example. If I told you I ate a burger and I went to the store and I bought a burger, one time I told you that, right? And then I told somebody else and I say, I bought a burger and I ate it at the store. And I told another person, I ate at the store. I bought a burger. I said that 3 different ways, right?
Right.
There's only one way all those things can be true, right? How can all 3 of those things I just said be true?
We bought a burger.
But how do I know that I didn't go one day and buy a burger and then another day go to the store? You see, I said it 3 different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like that can only be true if I did it all on the same day, right? I bought that burger from that store on that day and ate it. And I told you 3 different ways. But because I told you 3 different ways, the only conclusion you can possibly draw is that's the burger I bought from the store that I'm eating on that day, right? And I ate it at the store, right? I can't say I ate it after the store. I ate it before I got to the store. I bought it somewhere else. Because one of the ways I said I ate it at the store, right? That's just a loose example. I'm sure I can come up with a better one, but the point I'm making is that Jesus is telling you these 2 things in Luke 17 and Matthew 24, and you have to read them both because you have to sort out these details and go, this only works if it's all on one day. Otherwise, it seems like the thing he's saying before here, he's saying after here. And if you try to make it into a chronology, they don't match at all.
Right.
But if you understand he's leading up to something that's simultaneous and he's saying it a bunch of different ways and it's all, at one time happening, then you realize, oh, it makes sense because he's saying it's all one day. Okay. So he's saying that, and then he gives you, again, Matthew 43 is when he talks about, the good man in the house, and he's talking about your attitude and all that stuff. So I'm going to stop right there because that's a solid close to 2 hours we've been in it. But that's what you want to do is you want to go back and do that. And really, if you want to just do some homework assignment to really get this in your head, I mean, you really just want to take all the different sayings from Luke 17 and Matthew 24 and put them side by side and make your own chronology out of it to kind of just match it up and go, okay, cement that in your head. See, I've been studying this for 20 years. So it's like, you're not going to convince me this is not on one day. Like once you see this and you're like, this is the only conclusion you can have. If you just put what the apostles had from Jesus together, that's the only conclusion that you can have. I'm going to take you into the stuff in Daniel and in Paul and everything else and show you it only works if you line it all up on the same day. And then when we get to Revelation, I'm going to show you how chapters 11 through 15 all actually happen in one day. But it's just like this, where he's going to tell you the same thing in a bunch of different ways, but it's all talking about the same day. So that day is the day of the Lord. That's why it's so important that it's one day. That day is the day of the Lord. But then there's another day of the Lord, which is the 1,000-year day. So the day of the Lord starts both the day of the Lord's appearing, but also the 1,000-year reign is the day of the Lord. Okay? Because remember, Adam died on the day he ate the fruit, right? Spiritually, right?
Right.
But when did he die physically?
Within that 1,000 years.
930 years later.
Yep.
So almost 1,000 years, right? So the day of Adam's death was one day, but also a millennium, right? The day of the Lord is going to be one day, but also 1,000 years. Just like Peter said, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years. Okay. So you want to kind of understand how those metaphors kind of go side by side, but everything when you're reading now your New Testament and your epistles, when he talks about that day or the day of his appearing, or it shall be judged on the day and the day shall reveal it, or the day he appears, the day he reveals, they're always talking about everything we're doing is looking forward to that day. That's the day the Lord appears. We're not looking forward to the 7-year tribulation. We're not looking forward to, Armageddon. We're not looking forward to a rapture and then some other stuff happening. We're looking for the day the Lord appears. And that's the main, everything in the Gospels and everything in the epistles are pointing to that day when the Lord appears. That is the sign of your coming in the end of the age, is the day that he appears. And then the way that you'll know you're on that day is when the abomination of desolation happens.
Mm-hmm.
So you can know if you're a Jew in Jerusalem, time to get out of Dodge, time to just leave it all behind and just run. And then, if you're a Christian, you just know to look up, because he actually says, I'm going to show you this. Look up. This is the Luke's version, Luke 21. And he says there, and they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with power and glory. And he says, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. So read Luke 21 for next week by yourselves and go ahead and study that, because all this stuff, it's going to be a lot different in Luke. It's going to be more general. And he's really focusing on fleeing Jerusalem. He's not really talking about the abomination of desolation, but we know Paul talks about the abomination of desolation in his letters. So remember, this is Paul's gospel. He doesn't go into detail on it here. So he talks about them fleeing in Jerusalem, and then he says, when you see those things, you know that it's near, even at the door. So that's it. Yeah, like I said, next time we'll get into Daniel and we'll start getting into the different teaching on the Abomination of Desolation. And I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter, maybe like an hour or so.
I mean, no pressure, but I like these
Yeah.
sessions.
I do too, because I mean, I don't mind cutting off and getting into and starting off another time, but you see how my videos are. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm better at keeping them about an hour, but that's the thing is like, this is why so many people are deceived in the church, is because they're not training their brains to sit and listen for more than 20 minutes, right?
right.
But I mean, I used to sit and listen to pastors where they're going to talk about something for an hour and a half, because sometimes you have to teach for an hour and a half to make your point. I mean, we've been to college, right? Like,
Right.
you don't just go there and sit there in a 20-minute class. Like, your classes are, if it's a light class, it's an hour. But
Right.
sometimes the classes are, I mean, when I was in law school, my classes sometimes are 2-3 hours long.
Right.
And because you had to think through like a legal case and stuff like that and go, this isn't something you just like answer a quick few questions because you memorized 3 facts. This is like, what is this judge talking about here? What is this attorney talking about here, right? So I'm going to try to keep them like probably between an hour and a half. I think as we go forward, we'll go a little bit faster because we've already laid more and more foundation. So it's going to just be more like I'm saying, do you remember this? And we'll quick go look at it versus having to sit there and think it through as much. And I'm just going to assume as we go forward, as long as you guys are tracking with me, that, you know, we don't have to go back too much. But the reason I'm going to take more time with you guys is because we might have a year of this, right? I might get it to a year of me teaching you guys this stuff, and then I might never see you again because they just shut down the internet and I can't even get to Virginia and you can't get to Michigan. We don't know what's coming, right? So what I'm trying to do is try to teach you guys as much as I can about like how to think through these things. So if we get to a point where it was just like, I don't know, we never actually studied that part and Aaron's YouTube channel's gone, you know, you guys have enough of a foundation to carry it forward from there.
Right.
But the main things are the main things. I mean, you have right here the main things. So if you're out there sharing the gospel with people and you're talking about all the crazy that's going on in the world, you could talk to them generally about all these things. And one of those things is pestilences, right? So you can go out there all day, every day and say, yeah, I know this is crazy, but Jesus said that pestilences will increase and all these people would die. And, you know, you get into it and then you say, but the Lord is coming. But you need to get saved, otherwise all flesh on earth is going to be destroyed, right? So you can use it as a teaching element to point to the world around you generally, and then show them the main things. Because you might have somebody who believes the gospel, but you don't have time to teach them. But you know, could be a day, right? It could be like a single conversation with them, and you're teaching them about it. And it's just like, you just need to know this. When you hear about this guy on earth, and you hear people saying Jesus is here, don't believe it. You need to look for Jesus coming in the cloud. You need to pray. You'd be looking for him and you read his word, but know this, you're going to see this, and then you're going to see Jesus come in the clouds. That's what you need to know, because the deception is going to be so thick. It's saying, if possible, even the elect could be deceived. That's how thick the deception is. But you tell them to hold on to that main factor, right? Don't believe unless you see Jesus coming in the clouds. That's the real Jesus. He's not going to try to deceive you. It's not going to be some secret thing that you need somebody to tell you he's here, right? That's like just like the gospel. He's saying, you have an anointing that no man need teach you, right?
Right.
It's the same thing with his second coming. When you have the gospel and you have the basic equipment, when you have the Holy Spirit in you now to study the word for yourself and not need somebody lording over you and telling you how to think, right? Or telling you what to think. I'm saying, teaching you how to think. That's just like we're washing our minds. We're renewing our minds by watching the word. That's how to think, right? But if I'm teaching you to say, now you need to believe this right here, and it doesn't make sense to you, right? I can't even make it make sense to you, but be like, trust me. You just need to trust me. I have the anointing, right? And you'll get there one day, right? You just believe what I say. You'll get there one day. I mean, if I'm ever explaining something to you and it doesn't make sense to your brain, like, call me out. Just be like, that's why there's so many things I say that might seem like it's a simple question or a dumb question, but I want you to get to the conclusion yourself, because I want to show you that I'm not just spoon feeding you information, because there are people who will line up to just recite you and not really like, you know what I mean? Like, they like knowledge and they like information. They're like, I found this new teacher. And so they're just going to quote you and not really go, no. I learned stuff from this person, but this is just somebody along the trail, right? Like, the trail was set by Jesus. And this is some person who might've been a few steps ahead of me on that trail. But the point is he showed you, well, how do you know this is the right trail? Well, there's Jesus tracks up here. Look, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just following him. And that's all I'm trying to do is try to go, I want people to understand what Jesus said and how he said it, so we can see these things and reconcile these things, So they're not just saying, oh, that guy's really smart. He knows a lot of Bible. I just believe him, right?
Right.
Like, I want people to be carried forward to go, yeah, there was this guy I knew one time and he showed me some stuff about the Bible, but he died, or, we got cut off because of the internet getting shut down or whatever. But the point is you're carrying it forward with confidence to go, well, what, you know how the Lord thinks, how he's talking to you, and you got the Holy Spirit. So go a little bit further with them when they're saying, well, what does this passage mean? And you just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. But remember, that's all roots, right? The tree looks the same, but the roots keep getting deeper, right?
Right.
It's all about getting you more steadfast in the things that you know, and you hold on to those main things so you don't get deceived.
Right.
So one of you guys want to close us off in prayer?
I'll let you go this time.